On the 8th of December 1941, approximately 1 hour before the Japanese Air Force began their attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, infantry of the 18th Imperial Japanese Army began an amphibious attack at Kota Bharu in northern Malaya. Despite the date difference due to the international time zone, this was the first Japanese attack against the Western Allies in the Second World War. The victory at Kota Bharu would eventually lead on to the capture of the British-held city of Singapore, some 450 miles south. The Japanese completed their drive through the jungles of Malaya in 69 days in one of the fastest operations of the war. The landing site at Kota Bharu was defended by men of the 8th Indian Brigade in scattered trenches with pillbox support. In this game, we will see the area held by the 3rd 17th Dogras attacked by a Japanese battalion of the landing force in a game of O Group. The attacking force consists of a battalion of Japanese infantry supported by naval artillery from the offshore guns. Attached to the battalion is a platoon of engineers, but the force is mostly infantry. Defending the shoreline of the 3rd 17th Dogra Battalion, they have support from 2 fire missions of artillery, and a third of the battalion may be dug in when deployed on the table. The table consists of the beach area where the Japanese are landing and the jungle covered rear areas. In order to win this game, the Japanese have to exit at least 1 platoon off the Dogra table edge within 16 game turns. If the Japanese cause 3 food bars on the Dogras, it means that the defence is broken and they will begin withdrawing off the table. Any other result is a Japanese loss. The Japanese begin the game on the beach with 2 platoons deployed and several combat patrols ready to move forward to infiltrate the defence line. If they can capture the ridge in the centre, they can consolidate and deploy their reserve company there. The Dogra defence line consists of combat patrols dotted across the table. They are only limited to only 2 per company due to their lack of training. This will be a tough defence for the Indian soldiers. In their first turn, the Indians call for artillery fire. However, there is a mix-up at HQ and the map coordinates are incorrect. Nothing arrives. The Japanese begin their attack against the left flank, and they also begin pushing up the beach in the centre, hoping to capture and consolidate the large ridge where they can bring on their reserve units. The Dogra defence is still scattered combat patrols throughout the jungle, with 1 or 2 trenches lined by men from the Indian battalion. They're going to need to bring more men on quickly to counter this Japanese threat. And that threat is looming large as the Japanese move into position on the left flank and begin firing at the Dogras defending the trenches. In O Group, you need to roll a 4 or more to hit. However, the defenders get to roll their morale test. If they score higher than their morale, like the Dogras do here, then there is no effect. The Japanese fire is ineffectual. On the important ridge in the centre, the Japanese have launched a bayonet attack against the forward observer of the Indians. The outcome is inevitable and the forward observer is removed from the table in the furious attack. On the left flank, another Japanese attack goes in against the Indians in the trenches. This is more successful than the previous rifle fire, and the Indians are forced back into the jungle, fleeing as the Japanese take control of their trenches. Unfortunately for the Indians, their left flank has already collapsed and the Japanese are in control of their forward defences. At this point of the game, the Japanese have captured trenches on the left flank, but they're also making good headway in the centre. They need to consolidate on that ridge, but there are still units of Indians opposing them. And the opposition stiffens in the centre, with the Indians firing at the Japanese and removing a section due to a morale loss. The Indians begin deploying their reserves in the jungle behind the front line, hoping that this will shore up the defence against the Japanese assault. On the all-important ridge in the centre, the Japanese launch another bayonet attack against the Indians in the trenches, causing casualties and shock and forcing them out of their position. They're forced to retreat and the Japanese hold onto the top of the ridge and the consolidation point. Holding this ridgeline allows the Japanese to start bringing on their reserves, and they can begin applying pressure on the Dogra line in the centre. The Japanese attack may be moving forward, but Dogras in trenches are still raining fire down on them and still causing casualties and shock amongst the Japanese. Having cleared the trenches on the left, the Japanese have started pushing beyond those defences, whilst another Japanese platoon joins the attack. In the centre of the table, the fighting is still intense and the Japanese have started to deploy more platoons to take advantage of the consolidation point of that large ridge. Despite their spirited defence, the Dogras have been pushed back towards the river, but they're still holding a thin line of defence. Another Japanese attack begins. Testing to see if they can get into range, the Japanese infantry charge through the jungle straight into the Dogras who are already suffering from 2 shock. Is this going to be messy as well? In the furious fighting that ensues, the Japanese take casualties and shock. However, they overwhelm their opponents, they give them more shock and also KIA 2 of their sections. The remaining section is demoralised and is forced to retreat back even further away from the Japanese advance. Meanwhile, on the left, the Dogras move into position to attack the Japanese on their flank. They rush through the jungle and make contact, hoping to eliminate the Japanese in a furious hand-to-hand fight. Despite the exposed Japanese flank, the Dogras move into position but are forced to retreat as they take more hits than the Japanese. Things are still looking pretty bad on this sector of the battlefield. Then disaster strikes on the beach for the Japanese as the Dogras take aim at one of the company commanders who is destroyed on the beach. Despite this setback, on the left flank, the Japanese go in again with another bayonet attack. Charging into the beleaguered Dogras, they cause even more casualties and force them yet again to fall even further back. The Dogras are desperately trying to hold on the best they can at this point. Their defence seems to be crumbling all across the board. Can they do anything to stem this Japanese tidal wave? In the centre of the table, the Japanese have made a great movement forward. They're now trying to open this gap that is appearing in the Dogra defence. Can the Dogras hold on? The weight of the Japanese attack seems to say not. Meanwhile, on the left flank, the Japanese have almost cleared out the entire defence here. They've not only pushed one unit back, but pretty much destroyed another. The unrelenting Japanese bayonet attacks do not lessen, and they are pushing really hard against the Dogra centre. With the Japanese infantry now outnumbering the Dogras, it's only a matter of time until a massive gap is opened in the defence line. Sensing that the time is right, a Japanese platoon tries to make a rapid move for the edge of the table. The dice roll is in its favour and he manages to get off the edge of the table, therefore winning the game for the Japanese. And with that, the Japanese have pushed beyond the beaches of Kota Bharu. Not only have they managed to smash through the Dogra defence line, but they've also exited units off the table, and all within about 7 moves. This is the lightning blitzkrieg of the Japanese attack of 1941 down the Malaya Peninsula, and the Allies found it increasingly difficult to hold their positions in the jungles of Malaya. Thank you for watching this quick strike video. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please do subscribe and check out my Patreon.